Okay, so today we're going to make a simple LED light show that's animated using Unity and guiding an Arduino board through the Firmata protocol. In the camera you can see here that I have some LEDs connected. They're connected to an Arduino. If I move the camera gently, you can see there's the Arduino. That's an Arduino UNO. And we're connected to pins 3, 5, 6, 10 and 11 because those pins are digital out and PWM, or which is like analog out as well. And let's get going. So I'm going to use 2018.3. I'm just going to choose 2D because I'm just going to make a user interface. Okay, now we have our brand new project. I like to use the tall layout, so I'm just going to choose that. You can see that just gives us more visual space to play with for the scene. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is install an asset or a package. So I'm going to do from the assets menu, import package, custom package. Now I've got to go find this thing. There it is. So this is just a Unity 2018.3 or above Kreation.Arduino package. Yep, these are all the components that it has. It's just basically some DLLs. Install that or import that. And this will give us a new menu so that we can add a new game object, which is an on-off controller, and that helps us control these LEDs. Okay, so that's done. So in this sample scene, all it has is a main camera. If I go to game object, we should have a brand new, there it is, the new entry here, Arduino, and I can go to on-off controller, and you can see here it's created an on-off controller game object for us, and you can see we've got these different pins that we can adjust. So what did that do for us? Well, if I hit play, you can see in the camera there that the LEDs are they're off at the moment. Okay, so now the thing started. I can drag these sliders up, and you can notice that as the slider, so this is the pin 3 slider, as it goes across 0.5, the LED goes on. That's because it's set to digital, and I'll explain that in a second, but I can choose digital or analog. I can only change this though before I start play, because it only sets the pin modes at the start when it's initializing. Okay, so I can play with 5, I can play with 6, and obviously I could leave them all turned on, that's fine. If I want to put values in here, I can do that too, so put 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, now they're all on, and if I go 0, hang on, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and they're all off. Okay, let me hit stop, and let me change this to analog, and you'll see that if I hit play, it takes a little while to start. Here we go. I can actually adjust this now because it's analog. You can see that the light has range. It can go from very dim to quite bright, and so that's what's different with the analog. Okay, so let me hit stop. We'll leave it in analog mode. That'll make the animations more interesting. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to record some animations. So I need to go to Window and go to the Animation submenu, and I'm going to choose Animation. That'll bring up this new panel. And I'm going to dock this panel at the bottom, and then I'm going to go Window, Animation, Animator, and I'm going to take this panel and dock that in the same dock space at the bottom, so between Animation and Animator. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to animate this on-off pin output controller. We can basically animate these different values, and by animating these, without having to write any code, we can change the sequence of turning LEDs on and off, which is actually pretty cool. So let's hit create here, and this will make an animation and associate it with the on-off controller. We're going to call this, this first one will be called Cascade, because it makes the lights sort of cascade from one side to the other. Now if I hit add property, so this is the component name taken from this component here. You can see that's why it's got that. So we want to choose, I'm going to start with pin 3. Now we can't see the full name of the pin, so if we stretch this panel out a bit, then we can see the full name of the property. So I've got to do this for all of these pins, which is a little bit annoying, but that's okay. It's just a few clicks. 10 and then 11. You'll see, unfortunately, they don't quite sort. They don't sort in a slightly useful way, so you just have to be a bit mindful which pin number you're changing when you animate it. Okay, now we've got 5 pins. We have frames up here. I can change which frame I'm dealing with here. So if I type in 10, the time, you can barely see it, it's like 1 pixel wide, but the time bar or the scrubbing has gone to frame 10. I can actually scrub by changing this here in this sort of timeline at the top. If I click down here, it doesn't do anything. This is where you select keyframes, but if I click up here, I can scrub. And you can see as I scrub, the frame numbers changing there. Here we say how many samples or how many frames the whole animation clip will be. So I can make that 30 instead. And it actually sort of changes the zoom scale here. Okay, so what we want is I'm going to make this 50 frames actually, or 50 samples, and I can actually change the zoom of the time frame down here. Okay, so the reason I want 50 is I have 5 LEDs. I want to make an even set of frames between them. Let's get rid of this, so I can right click on here and delete keys. Okay, so if I go back to frame 0, they're all the LED values are 0. That's great. I can go to, just click away so that none of them are highlighted. I can go to frame 1 and then hit, in fact what I'll do is I want pin 3 to be 1, so I'm going to do that, and now automatically it's created a key only for that channel. And then if I type in here pin frame 10, we want to make this 0 and then make, say, pin 5. Actually, we'll leave pin 5 0 as well, and then we'll go to frame, come on, 11, and we want 5 to be 1. Click away from there. So the reason why I've done it that way, so initially everything was 0, right? Hang on, timeline. Bring the time back. Okay, so everything's 0, and then when we go to frame 1, let me just click away so nothing's selected. Okay, so we're in frame 1 now, and we can see that pin 3 will be 1. It'll be maximum bright. And if I go to, and in fact if I scrub between it, you'll see that it'll reduce down. So it's using, if we look at curves, you can probably see the curve there. So it's gone from 1 down to 0, and because here we put the value 0, now because I'm going from pin 3 to pin 5, here I need to set pin 5 to 0, but if I go to 11, you can see that pin 3 will stay 0 because that's what we last set it here, but here I'm setting pin 5 to 1, so that just gives us that transition. Okay, so let's go to go to frame 20, and in frame 20 we're going to make pin 5 0, and the next one will be pin 6, so we want that to be 0, so we've recorded a 0 value there. Let's go to frame 21, and we want pin 6 to be a 1, and then we'll go to frame 30, and we want pin 6 to be 0, and the next pin will be 10, so we make that a 0 explicitly, and then we'll go to frame 31, and we'll make pin 10 a 1. Now if we just scrub that just to see that, yeah, we want one LED to be on at a time, so they're all 0. So you can see that transition. So 3's a 1, then 5's great, 5's non-zero, then 6 is non-zero, and now 10 is non-zero. So that's going well. So let's go to frame 40, and we're going to make pin 10 as 0. The next one will be 11. Let's make that explicitly a 0. Go to frame 41, and we make pin 11 a 1. And then we go to frame 50, and then we make pin 11 0 again. And that's the full animation there. If I hit play, we can see those numbers changing. You can see up in the inspector the numbers are also changing, so that's looping quite nicely. And if I hit play, these changing values in the inspector will actually cause it to work. And you might say, well, why is that happening? You can see here this animation which we just recorded is playing, right? And that's because the on-off pin output controller has this animator component. So the animator component is running this state machine here. So here you have a no-code solution that's using the animation clips to do the work for us. Okay, so we'll hit the play button to stop it. We'll go back to the animation. Okay, so let's record another animation clip, and then we can set up a user interface, and we'll basically have 3 buttons. Stop, we'll have this cascade, and then we'll make another one, Cylon. So if you remember the Battlestar Galactica Cylon robots, they had a red eye that would go from left to right, back and forth. So let's animate our LEDs going back and forth. Okay, so to make another animation, I can click here and choose, instead of cascade, I can choose create new clip, and we'll call this Cylon. And now I have to add these properties again, so let's bear with me as we do that. In fact, let's just do it in list order because it's not going to make any difference at all. Just click expand, find the pin field, and now last pin one. There we go. Okay, now because we want to go from, say, pin 3 being on, and it goes all the way across to pin 11 being on, and then coming back to pin 3, we actually need it's 3, 5, 6, 10, 11, 10, 6, 5, 3. So we need that full set of those full different steps. We've got 5 LEDs, so there's 5 from left to right, and then after that there's the 4, the next 4 going from right to left, so that's 9 steps. So we need 90 frames, so make it a 90 frame wide sample. Let's just delete this set of keys, it's not going to help us. Okay, so from here we want, click away, we want, in fact, I'm going to delete, no, we'll leave those there because this initial key set just makes everything else 0, but we want pin 3 to be 1. Okay, let's now go to frame 10, and we'll make pin 3 be 0. We're going to make pin 5 be 1. Well, we will, but first of all, we're going to make sure it's explicitly 0. And then we'll go here and make it 1. And the reason why I'm doing that, it's because of the curves. I want to make it very clear when the pin has come on. So it's going to go from 0 to 1 very quickly. Okay, so then we want to go to frame 20. So we're basically following the same step as we did before for Cascade. Here we want to make this 0, the next one is 6, so we make that a 0 explicitly for the same reason. Go to frame 21, and now we make that a 1. Now we go to frame 30, and we make our pin 6 0, and we want pin 10 to be, we will soon 10 it on. Now we have to make it explicitly 0. Now we make it 1, that turns it on. Then we go to frame 40, and we make pin 10 0. We want to go to 11, so 11 is now 0 to make it explicit. Go here and we make that a 1. And then we go to frame 50. We're going to make that 0. And now we get going back to 10. Make that explicitly 0. Next frame, we're going to make that a 1. So now we're cycling backwards. Go to 60. Make that a 0. Next frame, we're going to 6. So I'm going to make that. Hold on. Just before we move on, I should make that explicitly 0. Next frame. Now we make that a 1. Okay, now we go to frame 70 and we make that a 0. We make 5 a 0 explicitly. Advance 1 frame and we make that a 1. And then we go to 80 and we make that a 0. And we're going to make 3 a 0 because that's the next one. Go to the very next frame and we make that a 1. And then we go to frame 90 and we make that a 0 again. Okay, and of course at that point it'll loop back, at which point it will be a 1 again. And so in fact, that gives us twice as 2 time frames where pin 3 is on, so we don't need that. I could actually make this 80 frames wide instead, or 81 frames wide. So let's do that. Now, we'll get rid of this. Okay. Now if I hit play, we should see those values. It's probably easier to follow up here on the inspector, but you can see it's going all the way down and all the way back, all the way down, all the way back. That's what we want. Okay, now if we want to make that happen through the animator, so the way this works, let me move this around. So if I hit play now, this is entry, this is like at startup. It goes from here immediately into the cascade, but we want to go to a Cylon if we want to test it out. So I need to right click and then go set layer as default state. And so this one will now be what it does by default. So if I hit play now, we will see, and you can look in the camera, see the LED should go from one side to the other and back again. So just like the Cylon. Okay, so now we have our 2 animation clips and they're ready to work for us. Now let's set this up so we can have a stop state. Now we don't need any animation for stop. Stoppers do nothing. So I can right click and create an empty state. And we put that, maybe put that in the middle here somewhere. I'm going to just change its name because new state is not very helpful, and we'll call this stop. And now I want stop to be the default. So we make that the default. So by default, there'll be no animation running with the LEDs. Now to go from the stop to say Cylon, I need to make a transition. And the other thing I need to do is I need to set a trigger for it to go from the stop state to follow this transition to get to Cylon. So we go to, in the animator panel, I go to, or tab, I go to the parameters panel, hit plus and add a trigger. I'll call this go-Cylon. And now if I select this transition, I can choose this condition, hit plus, go Cylon, right? So it's available. And we can also from here make another transition to go back to stop. And so we're going to need another trigger here called go stop. And if we follow this, go over here and add in the go stop condition for triggering that transition. So we can test this out. If I hit play, okay, here we are. We can see the stop animation is playing, and we can see the LEDs. If you look in the camera, the LEDs are off. If I trigger go Cylon by firing it there, it's gone up to the Cylon state, and it's staying there until I trigger or fire the go stop trigger, and that makes it take the transition back. So I can do that all day long. Fire that one, it's up to Cylon. Fire this one, it's back in the stop state. And that's what we're going to use. We're going to trigger these. We're going to fire these triggers using UI buttons. Okay, so let's stop this and we'll add some more transitions here. So from the stop, make a transition to cascade. Let's add a trigger for cascade. So go cascade. And then we'll make another. Now I need to make sure I've selected that. So over here to conditions in the inspector, choose go cascade. And then I'm going to make another transition back to stop. And we're going to choose go stop. And also, if I'm in the sales in the cascade state and I wanted to switch to Cylon, then I would need transitions going from cascade to Cylon. And I'll add the condition go Cylon, and that's fine. And also, if I'm in Cylon and I want to go to cascade, I can do the same thing. So choose go cascade like that. So let's see how that works. So if I hit play, all right, we're in the stop state. If I hit go cascade, and you can see the LEDs are flashing from left to right, and they always go left to right, left to right, left to right. They're not doing the Cylon action. If I trigger, make the Cylon fire, now it's going left, right, nicely. I can go back to cascade. Let's go back to the cascade, and I can make stop fire, and it stops. So that's working nicely. One little trick is if I, from stop, let's say I trigger go cascade, and I trigger go cascade again. Notice how that stays fired, because there's nothing consumes it, that trigger. So if I then go stop, right, the trigger was still fired, so it's gone from cascade down to stop. It was fired, so it followed this transition back up. So that's a bit annoying. And the same thing would happen. So from cascade, if I trigger cascade, right, so that stays triggered, and then I select trigger Cylon, the same thing happens because that was still triggered. In fact, I could make all three fire. Actually, no, I can't, because if I try to do any other one, they get consumed pretty quickly. It's actually really hard to make more than two enabled at once. But what we can do to solve this problem is I can right click, make transition back to itself, right? And put in go cascade, which means that from cascade it will go back to cascade. Now let's see how that works. If I hit play, if I fire the cascade trigger, it goes up to cascade, but if I fire the cascade trigger again, because there's this self transition that it can follow, it's consumed it. So that's cleared that trigger, which is great. If I go to Cylon, right, we don't have that self transition. So if I trigger Cylon again, it doesn't get consumed. So if I go to Cascade, it'll go back to Cylon. So that problem still exists here. So I need to make this self transition. I need to make the same thing here and here. So let's do that. Make a self transition. So this is for Cylon. So go to Cylon, and then for stop, self transition. And so for the transition, I'm right click, choose make transition, and then I left click wherever I want it to be. Because it's a self transition, I click back on the same state. Okay, so for this let me select the transition, and then I go plus, and we need go stop. Okay, so now this should be pretty good. If I hit play and take a drink of water, I can make cascade fire. If I try to fire it again, it doesn't stay triggered. I can go to Cylon. I can make that, see, it gets consumed, so I can make it stop. Try to make it stop again, but it won't. It consumes it, so we don't get that crazy behavior anymore. Okay, so that's working nicely. Let's make our user interface. So we'll make a panel. Now it's just focusing on the bottom left, so let's hit F in the scene view to see the whole panel. Let's make some buttons. Button. Okay, that's too small. Let's make it bigger. Let's make it 300 wide by 100, and let's change its text. Make it 35, even 38, and this one can be start Cylon. I've done that in more places than one. Oh, you gotta be kidding me, really? Oh, good. Cylon does not have a second C. If I look at those transitions, they're all, yeah, that's all fine. Okay, great. Okay, so now I want this to, actually, what's going on here? Where's my, let's have a look at the text. Did I, oh, I put an enter. Get rid of that, that's better. Okay, now let's make this button start from the top and move down in terms of positioning. So I need to change the anchor to be this top center, and the pivot. So the thing is, if I now set this to 0, because of this pivot point, it's got the button halfway through the top of the screen, and that's no good. I can change this here in the rect transform, change the pivot to be 1, which is the top of the button. Now you see the pivot points at the top. If I make pos y 0, now the button is pinned to the top of the screen at exactly the top of the button, which is perfect. Now I want to make it down, say, 50 pixels, so I have to put -50, and now there's exactly 50 pixels between the top of the screen and the top of the button. So that's wonderful. Let's make a few copies of this. So select the button and hit Control D a few times. This one, in fact, let's just edit this name. So this will be B Cylon. I need to edit the text as well. So this is going to be our, instead of start Cylon, this will be start Cascade. Edit this, B Cascade, and let's make this let's say -200, and then this next button, this will be B stop. I need to change the text to be stop, and we'll make this -350, let's say. Yep, there we are. Oh, I've done it again with the cascade. See how it's not centered perfectly? It's because I pressed enter. Okay, so now we have 3 buttons. Let's connect the buttons to the animation. So we choose, let's start with the Cylon. So clicking on the button, we have this on-click event. If I hit plus, I choose my object. The animator is on the on-off pin output controller, so I drag that into here. Then I choose the function. So on the animator, I want the set trigger by string. And then here, because we're talking about starting the Cylon, I have to type in go-Cylon, and it must be spelled exactly the same as how I spelled it in the parameters tab of the animator. Okay, so that's our Cylon cascade. Do the same thing, plus drag the on-off pin controller into this object and choose the function, go to animator. We want the set trigger by string, and this is cascade, so go-cascade. And then finally the stop. Now I can, hang on, there. I can hit the plus here. Now just like I can drag that in here. The other way I can do this is I can hit this funny thing here, and I can choose it from the scene on-off pin output controller. It's the same thing as dragging it from there. Okay, and then here I choose animator and the set trigger by string, and I'm going to type in go-stop, and there we are. So that hooks up these buttons to triggering these animations, and if we hit play, start Cylon, and we can see that it's made the Cylon animation. If I hit start cascade, it's made the cascade fire. Now if I hit stop, it stops. Start cascade, stop, start Cylon, stop, cascade, straight into Cylon, and stop. There we are. So it's working. No code needed, just using animation, and we have a nice user interface that can control Arduino.